pass it over to Professor Ian Lee, I want to talk a little bit about him. Ian, we know very well from his many times being on media doing consulting, but what you may not know about it, he has he has a PhD in public policy from Carleton since '98. He teaches strategic 88. Oh. No. I just took 10 years off your life and you're adding it back. Since '88, teaches strategic management as a professor at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton. He teaches across Canada, the U.S., teaches in Cuba, teaches in Europe. He has also taught at California State University at Monterey. He has worked in the financial sector for a very, very long time. He has also earned his master's. He's worked for many world organizations, including the World Bank, CETA, and large companies, including Coca-Cola. And he continues to this day to lecture around the world about strategic management and financial responsibility. As I said, he's seen regularly on media in Canada, on the main networks and on Sun News as well, talking about financial affairs. Most recently, he was heard on the radio program The Province with Tim, about a month and a half ago now, where he spoke with Tim about Tim's Million Jobs plan. I haven't spoken a lot about it because I would like to hear Ian talk about the Million Jobs plan. It's our basis for turning Ontario around. So I'm very pleased that Ian was able to join us today and talk about the Million Jobs plan, and for more importantly, to tell us why it's such a great plan and why it's going to work and why it's going to turn Ontario around. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ian Lee.
I've just got my computer here because I always have speaking notes. You know, it's from an old habit of being in the classroom for quite some time. But I want to thank Rob for inviting me here tonight to talk about the future of Ontario. You're quite correct. I did some consulting in earlier years, but I have traveled around the world. I've taught in a lot of different countries. I've been teaching in China since 1996, and I taught 10 times in a country called Iran, which is a very interesting country, I assure you. As well as I teach each year in Poland. I go there over in December for a couple of weeks each time. So the reason I'm talking about this is you learn, it's an old cliche, but you learn more about your country by leaving the country and coming back, because then you can do the compare and the contrast. And so I'm going to say some things that seem contradictory at the beginning. I really do think, having traveled around the world and taught on every continent except Africa, only because I couldn't get teaching contracts there, I don't think there's any doubt that Canada, when you take everything into account, standard of living and income and opportunity and education and healthcare and the whole bit, I don't believe that there's any country where we have a better lifestyle or better opportunity. And I say that, as I said, having been to an awful lot of countries. We really are the beacon of hope to countries around the world. And I see that in the and before I get in, and so I'm going to be talking about Ontario and then finally end up on the Million Jobs plan, because I want to go from the past to the future. But just so you don't think that's rah-rah, in many countries I taught in, including Romania, and Poland, and Russia, something I noticed in developing countries, the lineup outside the American and Canadian embassies are the longest of any embassy in these countries. In other words, people want to emigrate. There's two countries that people in the developing world want to emigrate to. It's Canada and the United States, without any doubt. I can see it with my eyeballs. You can see the lineups outside the consular offices in Romania, in Poland. You see it in Cuba. You see it in China, everywhere. And these people are walking and voting with their feet because they see these opportunities here that they don't see as much in other countries. So then the question is, well, if everything's so wonderful, what is the problem? Why am I even talking about this? And so I want to now drill down, because I do think that Canada, in the last 15, 20 years, we've made some, really since the end of the Trudeau years, and I've been very non-partisan in saying this on CFRA, under the Mulroney government, then under the Chrétien government, and now under the Harper government, I think that we've made a lot of very difficult restructuring decisions that have made our economy much stronger today. Everything from dealing with the deficit, to free trade agreements, to reforming EI, reforming the age of retirement for old age pension. And so we've done a lot of really tough and difficult decisions that the United States has kicked down the road, and Europe has kicked, I'm not even sure if that's the right word, they haven't even seen it to kick it down the road. They aren't dealing with these problems, these restructuring problems. So we've done a huge amount of good things. So then, what is the problem? And I think the problem is in Ontario, it's not in Canada. And I've lived in Ontario all my life, and I've certainly studied Ontario as well as federal public policy, and I've come to the conclusion that Ontario right now today is driving down the wrong side of the road in the wrong direction at the wrong speed with the designated driver who's inebriated with a dead ideology. And I mean by a dead ideology, the ideology that you can, governments can pick winners and losers, can choose the success of the economy by printing money that they, or borrowing money that they do not have to subsidize companies that do not need it to grow the economy. This is bogus, this is dead. And yet this particular government, and again, I'm trying to be very, and I really say this seriously, I'm being nonpartisan, because I think for 100 years in this province, we had very, very good government in Ontario, under both Liberal governments and Conservative governments. And we were the engine of this country. We were the engine of Confederation. We were what drove, my late mother came from Saskatchewan in the Depression, and the West was bankrupt in the Depression. You know, the Maritimes were bankrupt. They really were, if you go and look at the data. What kept Canada afloat in the Depression years was Ontario. And so we had this remarkable, you know, it was a bipartisan, really, consensus, whether it was Liberal or Conservative governments. And what happened, I think, is somewhere around the time that former Premier McGuinty was elected, something went seriously wrong. And we chose a set of policies that are taking us in a very bad direction, or a very bad place. I can run through the litany before I get to the Million Job Program. But I want to highlight what I think are the most serious problems. This has been documented, by the way, for those who really have an interest in policy and want to go and look it up. The Conference Board of Canada's new How Canada Spends. The Conference Board is very prestigious, very recognized organization. It ranks the economic performance of 26 jurisdictions, 10 provinces, 16 advanced countries in the 80s and 90s and up to the present. Ontario was among the global leaders in the 80s and 90s. And since the 2000s, Ontario has earned, according to their scoring system, a couple of D grades on economic growth. So the Conference Board is saying very clearly we're going in the wrong direction. If you look at the Mowat report from Toronto, or the Roger Martin, who used to be at he still is at the University of Toronto Business School, and look at his Competitiveness Institute, the two reports that came out earlier this year, you look at the graphs. This isn't partisan. This is hard empirical data. We are shrinking. Our productivity is declining. We are getting equalization. I mean, the first time we started to get equalization, which was always for poor provinces, like in the Depression, you know, Saskatchewan got equalization, or the forerunner of it. And so now Ontario is you could call it welfare for provinces. I mean, that's really what equalization is. And so now Ontario is designated as a have-not province because of a series of policy mistakes that we've made, I argue. And I just want to highlight them before, because the highlighting of what we're doing wrong then points to the million jobs of where we have to go and what we ought to do. And I want to start with the one, and I've talked about this on my weekly on CFRA, on the lunch bunch with Rick Gibbons, and it's just something that just really, really gets me going, and I'm sure it gets a lot of you going. I hope it does. I hope everybody gets really angry. And that is the green energy disaster. It is a disaster. I just want to, and don't mind me being wonky and go into history. I'm an academic, that's what I do. We created Ontario Hydro, whether we like Ontario Hydro or not, and I'm not a big fan of Ontario Hydro, but we created it in the first decade of the 20th century, in 1905, I think it was, when Adam Beck created it. And the whole point was to give Ontario a competitive advantage in energy against Michigan and the other states of the Northeast, because that's where all the manufacturing was in those days. You know, Ohio and New York and Pennsylvania. And so we were a much smaller country, still are, 100 years later. And so they wanted to do something to try to give Ontario companies some kind of an advantage. Now, all of you know that energy is one of the three most important inputs in any business. Wages, obviously, cost of goods, and energy, because it costs money to run, run a business. You have to have lights, you have to heat the place. And so they did it very deliberately. And so what Mr. McGuinty did with creating the green program, the green energy program, and the feed-in tariff, was to squander to destroy our energy competitive advantage that we had for 100 years against the US Northeast. And so that drove up the cost of doing business for Canadian companies. It's no surprise when you see or not every night, but when you see companies are closing in Ontario, people are saying, oh my goodness, what's going wrong? Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out. We've driven up our cost of energy to much higher levels than we did before. Not to mention the gas plant, which is sort of a spin-off from that failed decision. And so not only did we squander our advantage, but we're paying people 10 times the market price to go produce something, which is just, I just can't think of anything more absurd or more ridiculous. And I believe that Mr. Hudak has promised to rip those up, and I hope he does it on the very first day he's elected. I hope he destroys them all. Remember Mr. Chrétien with the stroke of the pen, gone, because they have hurt our economy so much. The second thing is the government indebtedness. We've quite doubled. Ontario, my sort of serious joke, although it's not that funny I don't think, is Ontario is trying to overtake Quebec as the most indebted province in Canada. Quebec is 50%, the debt of Quebec is 50% of its provincial GDP. We're at 38%, and within the next 3 years we're going to hit 42%. Quebec is trying, as the new premier is going down, we're trying to go up and take over first place, I guess, as the most indebted province in Canada. And surely if we've learned anything in the last 20, 30 years, you don't become a more prosperous country by going deeper and deeper into debt. That's the path of developing countries, the less successful developing countries where I've taught. Countries like Iran, countries like Romania, countries like the tragedy of Ukraine, which was a tragedy even before that thug and criminal Putin started to do what he's doing now. So there's the second failure of this government was the almost doubling of the provincial indebtedness, which is a tax in the future. The debt has to be repaid. It's not going to go away. Sovereigns don't go bankrupt. Sovereigns meaning governments don't go bankrupt. So that's a tax on all of us in the future. The third one, and it's something I've written about. I've published 2 or 3 op-eds in both the Globe and Mail and the National Post, as well as the Citizen, and that's Kathleen Wynne's absolutely outrageous and completely unjustified proposal for an Ontario pension plan. And again, I'm getting into the weeds a bit, but I do want you to have this data because I think it's important. And I talk about it all the time on CFRA. It's in my op-ed in the Globe and Mail from last year and in the Financial Post. Canada, according to the OECD, using stats from each of these countries, which come from StatsCan from Canada, we have the 3rd lowest level of elder poverty in the OECD. 3rd lowest level of elder poverty. And in the OECD, which are the richest countries in the world. So that means we have the 3rd lowest level of elder poverty in the world, because the other countries are much poorer than the OECD countries. The OECD are the West European countries, Sweden and Norway and Germany and UK, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Canada, US. So we're the 34 wealthiest countries in the world. We have the 3rd lowest level of elder poverty. 7.2% to be precise. So that means 92% of elders are not in poverty. We don't have an elder poverty problem in Canada. We have 7% elder poverty problem in Canada. And the only time I'll ever say something, and I respected Mr. Layton, I really did, but I never agreed with anything, except the one time I did agree with him was in the 2011 election when he said, let's have a targeted solution to target the 7%, not whack everybody with an increase in the CPP. Well, that's what Premier Wynne is proposing. She's proposing a universal social program instead of something targeted to deal with those elders who are overwhelmingly widowed females in their latter elder years. And there is a solution. Jack Mintz has proposed it for those who are interested, and it's an excellent solution. He said, look, just give them 100% survivor's benefits when their husband dies instead of chopping the husband's survivor pension in half. Jack Mintz is a very distinguished professor of economics, a strong fiscal conservative, and he has advocated doing that and possibly a top-up on the GIS. So she is proposing a program that's going to cause great damage to us. And people say to me, how is it bad to have a pension plan? Because those premiums that you and I are going to have to pay are money taken out of the economy that you and I are not going to spend on buying a car or going to a restaurant or going to a bar or going to a movie, because the money gets taken off your paycheck. It's called payroll deductions, just like EI premiums. And so that's going to be it's a tax. Premier Wynne I saw her on television, she said, this is not a tax. Well, she should go and read the OECD. It says that anything that's a compulsory payment imposed by government, called premiums, are a tax. This is a tax. It is a tax. The premiums of the proposed pension plan, if it is adopted. Okay, so I've got 2 more. I mean, I've got the list is much longer, but I don't want to go on all night, so I'll stop it at 5. So I've done 3. Green energy, government debts have almost doubled. The proposed Ontario pension plan, which is absolutely unnecessary. This is going to be a tax on young people, because they're going to be around a lot longer. I tell this to my students. We're about to take you to the cleaners. By the way, you young students, we're about to take you to the cleaners, us boomers. Don't let us do that. The 4th one is subsidizing profitable corporations to give them, as Tim Hudak accurately calls it, corporate welfare. This is outrageous. It is unjustifiable. Jack Mintz is opposed to it. Don Drummond is opposed to it. Every serious person is opposed to corporate welfare. We don't need to subsidize companies that are profitable. And if they're unprofitable, why would we be subsidizing them? Because they're about to fail. And I won't talk about General Motors. I won't get into that. It just gets me too upset to talk about General Motors while we're giving them money. The last one is the huge unnecessary expansion of the Ontario government. And the data is there for those, I won't go into the weeds, but the number of people who've been put on unemployment and Ontario has never had small government in recent times. In the last, really probably going back to the late 60s, 70s, Ontario's had a fairly decent sized government. So it wasn't as if we were, a very small government in Ontario, and yet what they did in the last 7-8 years was they ratcheted it up and started to hire all kinds of people to intervene in all kinds of areas that of course drove up the cost of government, and is not only has created these deficits, but has created a lot more red tape, as Tim Hudak has talked about, that has again slowed down job creation in the province. We should be at this time of this increasing competitiveness, where India is becoming more and more competitive. China's becoming really unbelievably competitive. We shouldn't be putting more barriers in front of job creation. We should be reducing the barriers, not expanding the barriers for job creation. And that's why I said that's on my hit list of the 5 worst things they've done. In addition, well, there's other things, but those are the 5 that I think are the problems that we need to focus on. Why I'm so intrigued, and I read the criticism already today, some people are starting to nitpick, why $1 million, why not 782,000 or something. I really don't care. And I said this to Tim Hudak, I said it on the Province radio show, whether it's $1 million or not, it's an aspirational goal. We're going in that direction and not that direction. Instead of getting hung up. I hope you don't mind, but I'm a professor, so I give advice, so I have to. I hope you emphasize that and don't get trapped in an all candidates debate where they start to get into the weeds and say, well, why $1 million and why not? Where's the proof? That's not the issue. The issue is it's a plan based on growth, not contraction. It's a plan based on creating more opportunity by reducing the barriers to business to create jobs. I'm in the public sector. I don't hide that fact. I know I'm in a public university and I'm tenured. I understand that. But I also said to Tim Hudak, he asked me what my views are on right to strike, and I said, I don't believe anybody in the public sector should have the right to strike. I shouldn't have the right to strike and stop students from going to university. And in fact, every time there's been a vote at Carleton, I've said very loudly to the union, if you guys go on strike, I'm going to be crossing the picket line, because I don't have the right to exploit our students, and neither do school teachers. But that's separate, and you'll deal with that when that issue comes, I hope. But the larger the million job plan, what I like about it isn't the money, the number. The number is a headline that grabs everybody's attention. The issue is that there's a package of policies in there that are going to take Ontario in the right direction, and that is to say, reduce the size of government, not eliminate government, certainly make the size of government smaller, get rid of the disastrous green energy program, which has caused so much destruction to Ontario because it has undermined our cost advantage. In fact, it's completely eliminated our cost advantage, as well as I'm absolutely certain that Mr. Hudak is not going to introduce an Ontario pension plan, which is absolutely unnecessary, and I'm convinced he's not going to be subsidizing profitable companies that should never be subsidized by any government anywhere. And so that's the message of the million plan. It's not the million. That's just the headline to grab your attention to go read the document to say it's a compare and contrast. I mean, what he's proposing is the antithesis, it's the complete opposite of what Wynn is proposing in terms of the direction they want to go in. They want to go down that road of more subsidized subsidies of profitable companies. They want to proceed with an Ontario pension plan that is not only unnecessary, because we have the third lowest level of elder poverty, but it's going to be extremely expensive and harmful to economic growth. And there's no evidence that they're going to wind down and kill that disastrous green energy plan. So that's why I'm so supportive. I'm not going to get hung up on the weeds or the details of the specifics of what Tim Hudak's proposing. It's, here's a suite of policies, a menu of policies, like in a restaurant, you have a menu of choices, and his package of policies are going to focus on growth and job creation and creating opportunity, rather than creating yet more barriers that are going to slow down the economy and continue taking us down the wrong road. So I'll stop because I don't want to talk longer than you did. I think I already have, so thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ian, for
Thanks.
for providing us some details and where we've been and where we're going to go. I'll just close off. As many of you know, I work in the agricultural sector for work. And we, from time to time, I have the opportunity to travel to Banff for work or to Halifax. So a year ago, next month, I was in Halifax for a conference, and one of the speakers was a farmer from Sarnia, and he was there to describe how he ran he had 150 acres in Lambton County, and he would talk about how he was able to have such a prosperous farm, make money, and be so good at it. Turns out he has a solar panels on his farm. So the green energy program comes out, and he says, sure, rip up 5 acres of prime farmland and throw solar panels on there. So he wasn't going to complain, because he was getting paid 85 cents a kilowatt hour for producing hydroelectricity. So he calls it the most ridiculous plan he's ever heard of in his life. But he was not going to say no, because he now has the province of Ontario paying him to provide energy for his entire farm operation, his home, and a couple other homes around him. He doesn't pay Hydro. Hydro is paying him to energize his residence and his business. People in Halifax want to move to Ontario and open up a farm and take advantage of this. So I'll close with that. It's a story I tell, and it tells you how to the extreme that this province has got, where we're now paying people to play the stereos, to have their lights on, and do everything that we want to do with Hydro. It doesn't cost them a penny. They, in fact, walk away with a nice, tidy profit in their pockets. So, thank you very much for coming. Please, we're around here for a little while. We'll mingle and chat.
You want to have a Q&A?
Sure, we can take some questions. Yeah.
I have a question for Professor Ian Lee. What about that other disastrous headline that's coming up every day about the 100,000 jobs that are going to be lost in the public sector, and it's being used to